Hello, audience. This is Rubatisham Zonik from IFDaD. Welcome to the session on polarization and technology-fueled disinformation, steps to disengage and tackle misleading web content. So we are first going to start off this session with a keynote speech from Professor Saeed Munir Khosru, who is the chairman of IFDaD, and he has also he was also the co-chair of two task forces under the G20 presidency of Indonesia. Please, let's play Professor Khosru's keynote speech. Thank you.
Fellow panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and friends and colleagues around the world. Welcome to the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. The Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance, IFDaD, is pleased to be hosting this session on a topic which I personally believe is quite important. The topic is technology-fueled misinformation in an era of polarization, tackling misleading web content. Now, we live in rather amazing times. At the very advent of 21st century, we have seen explosion of social media platform, from Facebook to MySpace. Today, as we speak, November 2022, the number of people on social media platform is nearing 5 billion, more than half of the global population. As it happens with opportunity, there's always accompanying risks. But think about the pandemic. How we would have survived this onslaught in absence of the online media platforms? Whether it was taking vaccine or online shopping, we were completely on online platforms. But this has become part of our life. That's inevitable and that's part of our life. But what also is equally true, unfortunately, even as we speak, more than 80% of the world's population is exposed to fake news. Survey after survey have shown more than 50% of the netizens or citizens of the network are wary that they're being led into wrong information. And I can give you plenty and plethora of examples. And how much dependent we have become on social media platforms. Whether it's breaking the news of a newborn coming into someone's family, or someone's loved one passing away, or breaking news like a war, famine. These days we rely more on social media platform, and the millennials, they're more glued to social media platform-based news as opposed to traditional channels like BBC and CNN and so on and so forth. So this is part of our life. Now, if you look at some of the incident which has been happening, if you remember, in one of those incidents, Cambridge Analytica, a UK-based consulting firm, did end up in a Facebook profile tampering, which apparently led to guiding voters in a particular direction during Britain's referendum on Brexit. During last US election, we have had a lot of issues, and in one such instance, about 100 pages remained undetected by Facebook's algorithm, and which had a view of more than 10 billion views. So these are having serious repercussion across the political spectrum, social spectrum, so on and so forth. Now, what do we do about it? Now, on one end, digital platform is here to stay, and as I mentioned in the initial remarks, it forms part of our life. But what also remains very important, that we as a level of individual, society, nation, behave responsibly. And we have seen some countries taking initiative like Germany, Singapore have taken laws whereby any misleading wrong information in the social media platform are severely penalized, and we have seen other countries follow suit. But we also have to be aware, even as digital platform rises, there's a huge digital divide prevailing in the world. Even as we speak, about 2 billion people do not have mobile phones. 3 billion people don't have internet access. So people who are left out in this game, not being able to access online goods and services, there's an inherent insecurity which drives into a lot of behavior and makes them vulnerable to wrong information. Even during pandemic, in the very initial phase, about 6,000 to 7,000 people got admitted to hospital based on wrong information. And out of that, almost 700 to 800 died. So we are talking about serious business here. And we have seen many suicides, teenage, young boys and girls taking out their own lives just based on wrong information. So this is something serious and here to stay. Now, widening the window. At the political level, what's happening? We have seen a rise of populism, whether it's a developed North American country like US, we have seen a rise of populist leader like Donald Trump, whether it's a country like Turkey in the middle of Europe and Asia, Erdogan, then the largest democracy in the world, Narendra Modi. So these leaders just have their own following. In many, many instances we have seen the political discourse have been seriously shaped, influenced sometimes by wrong information. So, and we have seen in many instances, people have been led wrongly into believing things which are not true. So that's where this polarization issue comes. How this whole wrong information is splitting the world down in the middle for wrong reasons. There's nothing wrong in having different political differences. Democracy thrives in differences. But what is wrong is when lies spread faster than truth. When lies step into our ecosystem and makes us believe into something which is not true. Wrong information, wrong belief leads to wrong decision. That is what this session is about. How do we tackle this wrong information leading to wrong perception, leading to wrong decisions? Having said that, the crisis we are facing is something, as I said in the initially, has to be faced globally. Even as we speak today, a few days back, 20 of the powerful economies of the world, the G20 community, have met in Bali. And these are the platforms for which the political leadership at the highest level need to frame rules and rules of engagement in the digital platform. And we have seen, instead of that, we are having more cracks. For example, we have had complaints of electoral tampering by countries like Australia and Canada against China. We have had complaints against Russia made by US. So it has to start at the top, where nations first agree to rules of engagement, how they engage in the social media platform. Then it has to trickle down below at a societal level when individuals are responsible in terms of what they share, what they don't share, what they say, what they don't say. So I, having had the privilege of being co-chair of two task forces on digital transformation of the G20 group, had the opportunity to have a closer look what is happening in the global landscape. And we need more collective action, more coherent policy from the governmental level. And G20 is a good platform whereby 20 biggest economies of the world who are driving digital transformation can come together and set some rules for others to learn from and to follow. And also in the developing global south, there is a lot of responsibility. 50% of the largest tech companies are based in Asia, and 4 of the fastest growing innovation hubs are in cities like Jakarta, Wuhan, Yangon, and Hyderabad. So what I'm trying to say, this responsibility is not to say that only developed democracies have to take the onus on their shoulder. It's as much falls into developing countries as well. So this whole north-south and this whole spectrum of collaboration has to move beyond the economic dynamics, has to move beyond the political differences, and there has to be rules of engagement, because everybody has to prosper in this social media platform, and unless we can come together, we'll collapse together. And the whole issue of polarization comes across not only the political spectrum, on a more technological level, social level, individual level, there has to be greater coherence. And if we have to tackle this misleading web content, the collective responsibility has to come at every level. So I'm very pleased that this gives us a unique opportunity, and I'm sure my fellow panelists, when they share their insights, and we have 2 more keynote speakers, will give us a more deep dive into many of the issues. As a keynote speaker, I hope I've been able to lay out the bigger picture, so the discussion that follow will help us to take a deep dive into some of the issues, economic, social, technological, that will drive forward digital transformation and bridging the digital divide in the coming days. And one thing we have to remember, millennials who have grown up in this whole social media ecosystem are the future researchers, analysts, political leaders, so on and so forth. So we have to drive fast forward, and we are dealing with a generation in many instances whose attention span is maximum 8 seconds or less than a jellyfish. So in that attention span, we are struggling with too much information. So the information that filter has to be reliable, has to be genuine, has to be valid. And onus is on all of us. With that note of optimism, I once again welcome you to this session, and I wish success to this whole endeavors, and hopefully end of this forum, we shall be able to come with some collective recommendations and help our leaders and also other stakeholders, tech companies, civil society, academia, to come together in common drive to make the social media and digital platform safe, secure, which inspires unleashing creative energies. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone. That was a really nice session delivered by Professor Khosrow. So let me introduce the rest of the panel that are with us. Dr. Adrian Rocklish, Associate Professor, National Taiwan University. Nadeem Anjum, Head of Notification AI from Meta. And Dr. Arif Perdana, Associate Professor, Monash University, Indonesia. Welcome, everyone. Now, I would like to start with Dr. Adrian to just share your introductory remarks regarding how this rapid digital transformation of today's era is in a way promoting or encouraging disinformation to spread wildly. Please, Dr.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I maybe want to start with kind of like two narratives that exist. So after the 2016 US presidential election, there was this debate about foreign influence. And in the beginning, also scientists assumed there is a strong influence, because on the supply side, we could identify a lot of like Russian sources. We know the IRA, right, the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. So there were these attempts. However, after a while, so also what researchers could show, the influence was actually pretty limited. So there are studies that really tested where the voters could be influenced with panel designs, and they couldn't find any effect. What we also now, especially in the US context, is that absolute minority is like continuously exposed to really questionable sources. That doesn't mean that disinformation doesn't play a role. It just means like what we consider or what we often label as fake news or fake news sources is not something that the average citizen in everyday life encounters. However, what we also know is that disinformation often comes from the top, and that in political communication, also politicians in their campaigning, for example, negative campaigning in the US, but also in other countries where this belongs to the political culture, is an issue. What also is an issue when mainstream media amplify this kind of content. So actually disinformation campaigns that are successful or really reach a lot of people, and we saw it also before with the Russian propaganda, is often amplified by traditional media, so when journalism actually fails. So that's one story. But the other is like we can't generalize the Western findings or the Western context, and we just don't know enough about the global South. And that's something where we need definitely more research, and also like where platforms maybe don't fight enough against disinformation. So that will be also maybe an interesting question I can then hand over from our representative from Meta. How is it actually in the global South? Like, are you investing enough to fight disinformation? Because in the US, we know about all these initiatives. Every election in Europe is covered, and we know there are a lot of measurements against disinformation. The question is like, how is it for the global South? So as researchers, we don't know enough, but it's also like very likely that platforms maybe don't do enough in these countries.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Yeah, that was indeed an interesting remark that you shared. We do need to have a very good insight into what social media platforms are doing regarding it. As far as I recall, or as far as I know, they have appointed certain organizations to keep a check on information, I think including Facebook as well. I'm sure we would love to hear more from Mr. Nadeem Anjum. I'll give the platform to you, Mr. Anjum, to share your remarks, just an introductory remark about what you think disinformation is. I mean, how much impact it's creating, particularly in the social media platform? I'd like to highlight, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'll share some of my remarks and then I'll then get to the specific question as well. I'd first like to start by focusing on understanding why does disinformation like spread, and why does it like spread like faster on social media? And there are like really two concepts that are like behind it. I think the first one is really like cognitive biases of humans. We as humans are like hardwired with like several cognitive biases, and these are just byproducts of how we have evolved. And these have been like good for us in many ways because they have helped us like survive over like other species. Um, for instance, we prefer information from people we trust, but also studies have found that negative information usually gets much more of our attention than like positive information. So we are all like hardwired with these biases, and that generally like makes us like more prone to like fake news or disinformation. The challenge really comes here in the modern era. Modern technologies really amplify these biases in a very large way. So think about a world where we like did not have like the digital age, then the disinformation would be contained within small groups. But with the digital age, information spreads all across the globe faster than speed of light. So disinformation spreads like all across the globe very widely, and that's one of the reasons why this becomes much more dangerous for us, this kind of disinformation. The other key aspect I'd like to touch upon is like information overload. With the rise of the digital age, it has become extremely like easy and cheap to create large amount of like content, be it like videos, be it tweets, be it like memes, etc. So there's a lot of information that's out there, and all that information is really competing for people's attention. And because an average human is exposed to like so much information, they generally let their cognitive biases do that filtering for them. And because of these biases, they generally focus more on negative content, and by nature they focus more on and give their attention to like fake news, and that's why disinformation spreads like very rapidly on social media platforms and the internet. In fact, there was a study which found that as the number of memes on the internet increases, the quality of memes that really become viral becomes low. So low quality memes really become like more viral. A study like recently confirmed that. So because of this niche, I think disinformation has been spreading at a very vast rate in the recent times, and there are like two key problems I'd like to like particularly like focus on. One is like political polarization. I'd like to like stress that like internet is not the root cause of polarization, but they definitely like exaggerated. For instance, polarization grew in the US, decades before the social media platforms came into existence. There was also an experiment that was run recently, which found that if people stopped using social media, that reduced the polarization of their views on policy issues, but that did not like diminish the divisiveness we have strictly based on like party identity. And one of the key reasons, social media platforms increase the spread of like disinformation and increase or exaggerate political polarization is that traditionally social media platforms have been designed to maximize user engagement. And because of our biases, because we are more likely to engage with like negative content, these polarized content really like spreads fast. With all of these like information coming to us, there have been like very active steps from like big tech all around the globe to actively prevent this. To like extremely clear, like none of these like social media platforms want to spread misinformation. It's a byproduct of algorithms optimizing for user engagement and the fact that human beings are biased to engage with more with like negative content. So as we have like learned about this, they're like large organizations, within each like big tech to make sure that we are actively detecting disinformation, and we are modifying our algorithms to make sure that we are not just maximizing for user engagement, but we are also actively removing content that's like fake news, that's like not true. And in fact, as I get into how we like combat the spread of disinformation, it's not like a single person's job. Everyone has a responsibility to really help us like combat this. It starts from the government, honestly. So for instance, the government has a big responsibility to encourage like independent and professional journalism. The news industry also has a role to play here to focus on like high quality journalism, call out like fake news and disinformation. Technology companies, that will really, the first will really help us like reduce the amount of fake news that's like generated. Technology companies have a big role to play to either like remove fake news from the platform or at the very least to spread its curb, right? And what they really need to do is that they need to invest in technology to find fake news, and identify its users' algorithms, to make sure that we are not spreading that. In fact, like algorithms, AI and ML are like very powerful tools so that we can automatically detect like hoax and remove them platform from altogether. Technology companies can also play a very big role in strengthening online accountability. So all of us have like online accounts in this age, but there are like several fake accounts as well. And generally, all of this disinformation is spread through fake accounts. So technology companies can play a big role, and which they're already like investing in a lot is to really identify fake accounts and remove them from the platform altogether. Educational institutions also have like a role to play here. We need to like fund efforts to increase like news literacy, especially like people who are going online for the first time. It's very hard for them to distinguish between real news and fake news. Education is like especially like helpful here. And finally, like we as humans, the public also has a role to play here. One of the basic things we all can do is that on social media platforms, we can follow a wide variety of diverse perspectives and people so that we are getting a good balanced view of the world and are not just flooded with like flooded with polarized content. And generally also come with the framework that if you see things like online, do not take it at its face value, evaluate it, and generally be skeptical about it. So I think we all need to like come together. Everyone has a role to play here, but I'm pretty sure that if you all do our roles, we can maximize the benefits of like social media and curb the spread of disinformation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Anjum. We have a few questions from the audience as well. We'll get back to that shortly. Let's give the platform to Dr. Arif Pardana, Associate Professor from Monash University. Dr. Arif, what would you like to say about the disinformation in the digital age? Please unmute Dr. Arif. Thank you.
Thank you, Anik. So I want to add up what Nadim said about human psychological behavior or cognitive biases related to the disinformation, right? So when we talk about disinformation, we need to understand what causes it, what motivates people, and why they accept it, right? So before we talk whether or not technology can effectively solve the spread of disinformation problems, we need to really understand this root cause. So I would say that the spread of disinformation is not just about technology, but because it is rooted in human psychology. So whatever you name it, disinformation, rumors, or fake news, this is not a new phenomena. So they have existed in human history since the ancient times, as Patricia mentioned before, right? Before this roundtable. So this information here is about stories that attract people, and people love to tell and listen to stories, right? So whether it's a fake or fact, it's the glue of human coexistence that defines groups and holds them together. Even though some disinformation can have a very, very detrimental impact to some communities, right? So, but the worst thing is when processing the information, people sometimes do not proceed naturally. So those who have accepted the disinformation, they cannot easily abandon their beliefs, especially if they have a strong emotional attachment to those beliefs, right? Or they may be excluded from their social environment if they refuse to accept the disinformation. So it can be extremely difficult to dissuade people from their opinions, even if they are presented with the facts, right? So this presentation maybe or could cause them to become even more entrenched, right? With the disinformation. So research has proposed solution to problem of disinformation. So basically, there are four categories to solve this disinformation: through the algorithmic, through the corrective actions, through the legislative, and psychological. So regarding the first category, the algorithmic solution. So this is actually the fake news or disinformation is actually the text classification problems. So multiple classifiers with natural language processing, they are applicable to predict whether or not the news contain disinformation. So for example, logistic regression, support vector machine, random forest, they can be applicable to solve this problem. So big tech companies such as Google and Facebook, probably Nadim can also mention and explain more detail on this, have figured out how to tweak their algorithms, right, to discourage fake or unreliable news sites, and also preventing disinformation from appearing in the people's newsfeed. But sometimes these algorithms have some disadvantages as well. They are not perfect, right, when it comes to detecting the misleading contents. And some previous attempts by Facebook also create some backfire, what I've seen from the magazines, newspapers as well. The second category, what I've said before, regarding the corrections of false or fake news here through the fact-checking tools, right? I know that Facebook also have this kind of fact-checking, and some of the platform like PolitiFact and Snopes, right? They use this, but this fact-checking, even though it is loadable, but their effectiveness has not been clearly demonstrated because it's not scalable as well to do the fact checking for every fake news. So it is time consuming, and also it takes a lot of effort, right? A lot of resources. And then in the macro level, a more radical approach involves like the introduction of new regulation and legislation to combat disinformation. Like some countries, France, China, Belarus, Kenya, Burkina Faso, Malaysia, and Cambodia, and also Vietnam. So they have this legislation in place. So at least these policymakers at the country level, so they have at least four ways to prevent the spread of this misinformation. First, they can regulate the content directly, provide someone with the authority for regulating content, and then redesign the structure of platforms in which content is generated, right? And then also support the creation of the instruments that can raise citizen awareness from the educational perspectives, and then enable them to identify and also prevent the dangers of the misinformation. And then the last one about the psychological, because as I mentioned before, this information is actually rooted in the human psychology. So this psychological solution can be effective as well. Like the psychology called this approach as inoculation, right? It's like what's that vaccine for brainwashing. So in this psychological inoculation, so the attenuated challenge, right, consists of two elements. So the first one is like a pre-warning of a threat of an attack of one's attitude, and then the second one is preemptive or preemptive rebuttal or counter arguments or pre-bunking. So this can be effective, right? Like a preemptive rebuttal of misinformation weakens the misinformation. Like as I mentioned before, like a medical vaccine often consists like what's that weakened virus, right? So there are some research use climate change as the context of this disinformation, right? So in that study for climate change misinformation, so the participants were given some like a vignette and descriptions that some political actors were trying to mislead people on the issues, and then later on the participant will be provided with the facts, that the arguments to refute the misinformation preemptively, right? So then before they were later exposed to the full dose of the misinformation, so they have the mechanisms to defend against the later exposed. So that's the four potential solution for this disinformation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arif. That does sound quite interesting, especially the vaccine for brains that you've mentioned. It is something that we can perhaps influence social media platforms to incorporate, or in other technological platforms as well. So, but however, the policies that you mentioned that governments undertake, or some regulatory bodies, that can be debatable, because it might introduce some restriction to freedom of speech, perhaps. So we'll come back to that. I'll go back to Dr. Adrian on certain questions. You've mentioned about the failed journalism. So does it, for instance, presenting information in a particularly different way, or maybe in a biased way, does that amplify disinformation, according to you, be it through a journalist, or be it through media contents, video media contents, or even still images? So how much effect does misrepresentation of information, a correct information as a matter of fact, can that amplify, what we call as a Chinese whisper? It ends up as a different information. So what do you think that basically that presents itself? Is it too harmful or not? Please.
Yeah, first of all, that's at the core of what Claire Wardle defined as fake news. Like we always talk about fake news, but when you really define it, maybe you find different forms of mis and disinformation, or especially disinformation, if it's intentionally created. It can be, for example, just this kind of for entertainment, right? Like The Onion, you read an article, it's made up, but it's for entertainment. That's not really to damage people, or to harm people. And then you have for example, stories that could be because of clickbait stuff, where you kind of the headline is totally different from what is the content of the article, and then goes on. And maybe the most extreme form is really what is pure disinformation is completely made up, everything. But very few stories are like that. Also, when you look at propaganda, what works, it's only you take something that really exists, and then maybe you change as one small part of the story. It can be the framing that is different, you change a picture, something like that. So that's definitely a problem. But I think what is at the core of the problem, and here maybe I can also use Taiwan as an example, is when journalism doesn't have the resources anymore to really do its job, if the system is failing. So if journalists don't have the time to do the verification. So at the core of journalism is verification. If journalists don't have the time to verify the content or the sources, then it becomes a problem. And of course, there's time pressure. We see it whenever there's, for example, a disaster event, a terrorist attack or something. They just share pictures without verifying it. There's the pressure because the first one publishes it, then everybody follows, right? There are so many examples where also Western journalism in general fails, but especially in Taiwan, it's a big problem with the media system. And there I want to also connect to what we heard before from Arif. It's true, the research also shows fact-checking, especially as a label, when we use it on social media and we reach certain fringe communities that strongly believe in something, it doesn't change their mind. They anyway don't believe fact-checking organizations as a source. But in Taiwan, actually, fact-checking plays a role when journalism fails. So fact-checking organizations do the fact-checking. They do basically the real journalism to verify the content, figuring out what is really the truth. And then what is interesting, that a lot of media outlets actually quote these fact-checking organizations after that. So the influence is not directly on the user or on the reader because they go on the page, because that one we also know very few people go regularly to read fact-checking home pages. However, it's kind of indirect because then journalists use it in their story as a source to kind of change the reporting about a certain issue. There are also many collaborations. This is again a problem of resources. So basically they externalize this cost, right? We could also criticize that. but that's how it's done. That like a lot of like media organizations, they also collaborate with these fact-checking organizations, and they publish then these stories in their outlets that have like a wider reach. So this is also to finish my comment. It's very important to always consider the national context. Like also as researchers, we know the US extremely well, and we always assume, or especially people from the US, they always assume the US is the case we have to generalize. But maybe the US is a rather unique case, and there are other countries, we could take the typical European country, to generalize, and it's very difficult to transfer that knowledge or this assumption to the Asian context, whether it's Taiwan, where I can really talk about, but also like other Asian countries, as you probably all can confirm.
Yes, definitely that does make sense. But what do you think can be a substitute for fact checking? Since fact checking is, as you mentioned, is not being that effective, and I think Dr. Arif Pradhan also agrees with it. So this if fact checking isn't working, what should come instead of fact checking institutions or maybe social media platforms? How can we verify or influence that a message that it's fake or it's meaningful or trustworthy?
I mean, it's also interesting what Arif mentioned, all these different approaches. I think we should all consider them, but you mentioned it already, and maybe later we talk about it. Regulating, we should be very careful. I say that also like as someone who analyzes authoritarian countries. We should be very careful how we define the truth. If we say the government should define the truth, and as soon as these regulatory tools are installed, it's very, very difficult to get rid of them again. And some of these authoritarian countries that were mentioned, actually, they mistreat these tools, we could say. The other thing is, like, of course, social media platforms should do their best, what they can with algorithmic interventions, that they, for example, can say they don't amplify certain content anymore. They maybe can also delete certain content if it's possible. But in general, I think stronger journalism helps, definitely. We see that countries that have like strong public service media, they have maybe less, or they're more resilient, we can say, against disinformation. But there's also the social aspect. Like I think when we think about disinformation and why it works in certain countries, that's also like a kind of like a social question. It cannot be purely solved with fact checking or technical solutions. I think this is something we should keep in mind.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adrian. That does sound promising. I think, but we have to quite rely on technological platforms such as the social media platforms on intervening and delivering such a action or implementation. I'll go to an audience question. I think it's meant for Mr. Anjum. It's from Giuseppe Attardi, and I'll quote it. Misinformation is an elusive concept. More often, we see distortion or abuse of true information. For example, in Italy, the government claims that France only accepted 35 migrants from Italy. However, France overall accepted 150,000 migrants more than Italy. Both are true, but they are used to support different points of view. Is misinformation not the real problem, but the misuse of information? It's meant for the whole panel. Please, anyone who would like to answer the question. Yeah, Mr. Andrew, if you.
Yeah, I can start. So I think it's true basically. In my perspective, I think there are like two aspects of the problem. One is misinformation, which is like very real as well. There are like a lot of like bad actors who intentionally try to create like fake news, and then that gets like spread vast throughout the internet. I think that problem exists. But the other problem, which was like rightly raised in this question, is basically differences in opinions. You can view a fact from a different lens and project it in a different way to make a completely different meaning out of it, right? And I think, yeah, there are both problems, but the solutions to both are, often like identical. For instance, if you want to bring in like algorithmic interventions for it, we can have like algorithmic interventions for both kinds of problems. So yeah, so I think to summarize, I think both problems exist, and we need to be solving for both, in my opinion. Would love to hear from other panelists as well if they have an opinion.
Please, okay. If Dr. Arif Pardana or Dr. Adrian, if you'd like to share your 2 cents. We'll start with Dr. Adrian. If you want to share anything regarding this question. I mean, there's 2 different type of information which is correct, but it's biasedly presented. So how can we differentiate, or how can we manage this type of a challenge?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent example. It also fits very well what Wordle shows. Like, there is not like the fake news and totally made up versus everything is true. I think it belongs to the area. It's probably like we could count this as political conflict or political speech. It's this kind of area where we should be careful. I think it doesn't fall under any kind of regulation. It's probably something we need to endure. Every political debate works like that. So again, this is like it's a general issue, we could say, in politics, and then it depends on good journalism, I would also say, that covers it, that is kind of like challenging that. But there are also journalistic cultures that say, like, you're not going to challenge political speech, right? Maybe we could say in the US they are holding more back with that, especially during election time. We also see that actually with Meta, with the decision when Donald Trump now runs again. They say whatever he says shouldn't be fact-checked, right? That's also like a kind of like shows a different cultural approach, whereas maybe in many European countries, politicians are often challenged, especially in the talk shows when they make these statements. So as a citizen, I would say we can't expect from the average citizen, give them the burden to do on their own this kind of like fact checking or checking that kind of information. I think it's really again like I sound like a broken record, where we need good journalism, and when we have good journalism, then this won't be such a big issue.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Another question from the audience. I think this is what's meant for Mr. Anjum from Meta. How independent is Meta Oversight Board from Meta, being funded by Meta, and thus expenses need to be approved by it? The Oversight Board, I think.
Yeah, the Oversight Board is part of Meta. It's so basically it's part of the entire organization, and it's funded through our regular budgetary process, right? But this does not really create a conflict of interest for us, because ultimately we are here to provide the best value to our users, and we really believe in like long-term user value we provide. And it is our view that if we are providing or encouraging like disinformation through our platforms, that will result in providing us like bad user experiences, and that will in turn be bad for the business. So I think it's not really a conflict of interest for us. Investing in removing disinformation, investing in oversight is like very well aligned with our like business goals and objective as well.
Thank you. I'll go to Dr. Arif for briefly regarding that you mentioned the vaccine for brain, an interesting concept. Let's explore that. What do you think? Like, how can we influence the human psychology, or is it too ambitious? So that we do not adhere to misinformation. Anything regarding this vaccine for brain or any other form that we should try to approach to like root ourselves or strengthen the human psychology in general.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the potential solutions other than like algorithmic interventions, right? So like I mentioned before about the psychological inoculation. I forgot inoculation. Sorry, that's the tongue twister word. Inoculation, and then probably like gamifications. I forgot, there is one website that provide gamifications where people can understand how actually the fake news is created, and then It involves from which sources, the accuracy of the accuracy of the content, right? And then another thing is like providing the warning whether the content that you want to share is actually accurate, whether you understand where it comes from. So actually, it reminds people to be aware of what they are sharing, right? So that's actually the things that we can do to try to tweak human behavior or to intervene their cognitive biases. Yeah, I think that's one of the potential solution other than a technological solution. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to Mr. Anjum for a bit. Another question that we have is, can we contain the disinformation wildfire within the boundaries or to certain sectors? I think this meant as in within national boundaries, if something is, so that it does not escalate further, or maybe to certain other factors that we can limit it to, so that it does not maybe, amplify any misinformation in general.
Sorry. From what my understand,
It
as
is
I mentioned before,
the
what
question. Sorry, sorry to.
this is for me
This is
or
for Mr.
to...
Anju.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Can we do it? I mean, yes, we can, but I don't think that's the ideal solution. I'll tell you why. So the key to curbing misinformation is to really identify it. And if you're able to identify it, the ideal thing would be to remove it altogether and not just curb it within a certain nationality, right? So I think identifying, especially algorithmically, identifying misinformation is a challenging problem. We are making progress towards it, and it comes with a certain level of accuracy. It's obviously not 100% accurate, but our goal here is that if you do identify misinformation, just remove it altogether. I think that's a better solution than curbing it, in my opinion.
All right, thank you. And how much? I mean, it's a question from myself. Like, how much can we rely on technologies such as AI to identify and tackle this disinformation that is probably created by a human mind? Can we rely on AI sufficiently?
In my opinion, we are making progress towards it, but AI alone is not enough here. It's basically a multi-stakeholder problem where, like I mentioned, the news industry, the governments, the technology companies, the educational institutions, and generally a more educated public, all of us play a role in being able to tackle it. AI plays its role, but at least in the current state, it's not self-sufficient.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anjum. So last question of the day I have is, if we focus on young audiences in general, they are quite vulnerable to disinformation because they do not have certain experiences or certain knowledge that they need to process and some information. So what can be done in this sector? It's the question to all the panelists. I will start with Dr. Adrian. Sorry, please, Dr. Arif, you may proceed.
Okay, so even if we train AI, right? So there are certain criteria that we have to put in the AI. So for example, right? This information mostly they have bad style, bad spelling, bad punctuation, limited vocabulary, using terms of abuse, presence of emotions, informal language, curse word, incivility, ungrammatically, right? So we have to put this as the criteria when we train the NLP, when we train the model, right? So we can use this to educate young people as well, because we cannot just rely on the AI. So we have to create kind of awareness educational platform. If you look at this information, you have to be aware of this criteria. So I think that's one thing that we can do other than a vaccine for brainwash that I mentioned before, providing gamifications, intervene their cognitive biases. So this education can also be leveraged as well.
Yes, that does sound quite promising. A follow-up question. I mean, there are kind of more mediums of of the disinformation. It might not be just text form. Now there are video forms, and an interestingly new disinformation method is, I would say, deepfake videos created by AI itself. And we recently saw a deepfake video of President Zelensky delivering some, misaligned speech, perhaps, which was aimed to create chaos or create some distraction. So, what can be done to tackle this newly emerging forms of disinformation, such as the deepfake videos? Dr. Arif and Mr. Anjum can join in as well. What do you think, Dr. Arif?
So this is actually quite challenging questions actually that needs to involve technology to understand whether like such a video, whether it's a fake or not fake, right? So for, let's say, for a layman person, right, it's quite difficult for them to differentiate this is real person or not real person. Sometimes I myself even it's quite difficult to see whether this is fake or real person, right? Because it's too soft, and then the movement is like pretty similar to the human movement, right? So I think there should be more understanding about the technology. So how this technology, right, could create detrimental effect when we ourselves, right, have no idea, have no sufficient understanding when we look at that. So I think that's my opinion.
Fabulous. Mr. Anjum, if you would like to add a
Sure.
comment.
I'd like to that. I definitely second that. It's like difficult to like identify for a layman human whether something is like real or like a deep fake video. However, I think there are two aspects to it. One, I think better education can help. And actually, if you like pay very close attention to a deepfake video, there are like certain things that can help you identify that's actually fake. For instance, deepfakes are often they fail to fully represent, the natural lighting or the natural facial hair, or if you pay close attention to things like the lip movement or moles, etc. So by paying like really close attention, it's possible to possibly flag that something could be a potential deepfake. So I think one idea is education, so that people can pay close attention to it and identify it. But the other aspect of it is really, if you think about it, if AI is able to create a deepfake video, AI should be powerful enough to detect it as well. So using similar features like I mentioned, right, by paying very close attention to certain like facial features, we can train an AI that is able to like predict whether or not a video is like fake, and being able to like flag it, remove it, or at least like give a warning to users that, hey, this might be potentially like fake. Use your own judgment here.
Okay, that sound quite promising in terms of a solution. I'll come back to the final question again. That is the young audiences. What can we do to help them not be a victim of disinformation in this digital era? Because they are quite, involved in technologically, technologies such as social media platforms and even all types of audiovisual platforms that exist. So what can be done to help them? Question to the whole panel.
Sure, I can share some of my thoughts. I think the key thing to understand is that with young people, they are like in their formative years, and so that's why they are like much more prone to such disinformation, right? And they're like much more impacted by it. I see like disinformation like as a knob. So let's say if you focus on like algorithmic solutions, for instance, it's a knob between how much disinformation versus true information you actually want to share. So if you go on the very extreme, you can get like good at curbing disinformation, but you'd also like curb out some useful information. So really, like for young people, I think the focus should be on reducing as much disinformation as possible at the cost of even potentially removing some like good information, because on balance, I believe that would be like positive for them. And there have been, a special version of like apps for like young people, like YouTube for Kids, for instance, and they're really designed to make sure that we have like authentic like sources, and we do not like just keep it like a free for all platform. and we have like special quality checks for them, especially to ensure that the young vulnerable people do not get exposed to disinformation. But that does come at other cost, like they're probably getting shielded with some good information as well, but that on balance is like a worthwhile trade-off in my opinion.
Yeah, that does sound quite interesting. If the other panel would like to join regarding this.
Yeah, maybe a counterpoint. I think first of all, we should trust more young people. In general, what we also know from research, humans are not as gullible as we often describe them, especially in the public debate. This is one thing. The other is like, especially old people, these disinformation studies that show who share the most or are most exposed to, actually they show that especially older people, in the US context at least, are the ones that share that kind of content. So then again, it's like we of course should care about young people, especially when we talk about like young people under 18, right? Because in these studies, usually we focus on 18 or older, right? So of course that's very important, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget, if we look at what is shared or which communities are most affected, at least in the US context, it's older people. So that's as a kind of like a counterpoint, and we shouldn't forget them.
Yes, definitely. That is a very interesting point. We should focus on elder population as well, and there might be other minorities also who are being maybe overlooked by us as well. We're not aware, so we should look into that as well. If Dr. Arif Pradana, would you like to add any points to that?
Yeah, just want to add a bit of Adrian said before. I agree. We have not just focus on the young people, but also old people. Even in my WhatsApp group, for example, old people like to share the hoax actually compared to the young people. And even in Singapore, for the education purpose, right, they create a video that actually the focus is actually old people sharing the hoax or disinformation. So I think the challenge is to educate old people actually, because their mind have already entrenched with the misinformation bias, right? And then for the young people, we have to say that there's no problem with differing opinions, political views, but the problem is about lies when they spread faster. So that's young people needs to be aware of. For old people, that's really difficult for us to change their mind, especially about the political views, about their religious views, something like that, right? So I think we should be aware of when educating young people, and also be aware of old people also has also shared this kind of disinformations as well.
Yes, that is the very important point. We do have an elder population being the new victim. I guess it has something to do with their, I mean, they're, I think, new to technology, or maybe they still struggle to differentiate what platform to trust. So yes, we do need to focus there. We got some really insightful points, really insightful discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Thank you, Mr. Anjan. Thank you, Dr. Arif. It was a very insightful panel indeed. And that concludes the session today on disinformation that is being fueled in the digital technological platform, basically. Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned for the next sessions.
Thank you.